We are now ready for part 2 of our absolute value lesson, which is on the opposite of. But before we get started on this, we need to check our answers from part 1. So have your answers ready and we will check them. Anytime you have the absolute value of something, the answer is going to be positive. So number 1, the absolute value of negative 19 is 19. Number 2, the absolute value of negative 25.3 is 25.3. Number 3, the absolute value of negative 93 is 93. Number 4, the absolute value of 6.14 is 6.14. Number 5, the absolute value of negative 16 is 16. Number 6, the absolute value of negative 7.6 is 7.6. Number 7, the absolute value of negative 8 plus the absolute value of 6 would be 8 plus 6, which is 14. Number 8, the absolute value of 23 minus the absolute value of negative 9 is 23 minus 9, which is 14. Number 9, the absolute value of negative 18 plus the absolute value of negative 10 is 18 plus 10, which is 28. Now we're ready to move on to part 2 of our lesson. Opposite numbers. These are numbers that are the same distance from 0. They are two exact numbers with different signs. Right here we have a positive 3 and a negative 3. They are opposite from each other. They're both the same distance from 0, and they also have opposite signs. An expression means the opposite of when it has a negative sign before a parentheses or the absolute value bars. Right here in parentheses, we have a 3. Anytime you have a number in parentheses, it is that value. So we have a negative sign on the outside of the parentheses. This would read the opposite of 3. The opposite of 3 would be a negative 3. We can also have a negative sign on the outside of absolute value bars. This would read the opposite of the absolute value of 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3, but the opposite of that would be a negative 3. If you see a number written like this means the opposite. So this would read the opposite of negative 5. The opposite of negative 5 would be 5. The same is true with an absolute value sign. This would read the absolute value, it would read the opposite of the absolute value of negative 2. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2, but the opposite of that would be a negative 2. Anytime you have a negative sign on the outside of the absolute value bars, your answer is going to be negative. What does the opposite of negative 56 equal? Well, that's going to be 56. What does the opposite of the absolute value of 16 equal? That is going to be a negative 16. Here's a few other examples. The opposite of the absolute value of negative 8. Well, the absolute value of negative 8 is a positive 8, and the opposite of that would be a negative 8. Right here, we just have parentheses. There's no opposite on the outside, so this is just the value of what is in parentheses, which is a negative 72. We read this, the absolute value of, the opposite of the absolute value of a positive 4. The absolute value of 4 would be 4, and the opposite of that would be a negative 4. And right here I have the opposite of negative 36. The opposite of negative 36 is a positive 36. So now we are going to do a little bit more practice on your paper, whether you have printed the handout or on your notebook paper. Only do numbers 10 through 15. Once you have completed 10 through 15, you may start the next video and we will check our answers.